Okay, let's go on. Paragraph 3 talks about duplication of benefits. This is just the part of it that says it's the county's responsibility to collect available insurance funds because the federal government is coming and helping them. I certainly don't have a problem with that. It's the way it ought to be. If there's money for debris removal after you've been fully compensated to the degree that you can for your loss, then that should go for debris removal. So they put that requirement, that they have that requirement with the federal government in there. And I've read everything that FEMA has ever posted concerning debris removal. And I'm just quoting their disaster assistance policy here that says it's their job. They have to do that. They have to verify whether or not there's insurance coverage. That's part of their agreement for getting the help from the federal government. So this is from a typical homeowner's policy. If you have a homeowner's policy, you will have some language somewhere in there similar to this. We will adjust all losses with you. We will pay you unless some other person is named in the policy or is legally entitled to receive payment. That's what an assignment does. It makes somebody else legally entitled to receive payment. So again, if I go back to Lake County and Weed, and a lot of those are still in dispute, they didn't sign this right away. They're in the middle. They have the ability to fight. What if they just flat make an honest mistake? Let's say that they only intend to take an amount equal to your 5% excess. But somebody makes a mistake on the insurance company side and they send a whole bunch of money. How difficult do you think it would be to get that corrected and that money back from a bureaucracy? Okay, so my first 2 slides, I told you that the way that FEMA explained coverage for debris removal under insurance policies was not correct. These are the insurance policies, and I'm going to show you what the difference is. Debris removal. We will pay the reasonable expense you incur for removal of debris, covered loss. This expense is included in the limit applying to the damaged property. The following coverage limits also apply. When the amount payable for the property damage plus the debris removal exceeds the limit for the damaged property, an additional 5% of that limit is available for debris removal expense. In other words, that money that they're saying is set aside strictly for debris removal, you don't get to that money until all the rest of it is used up first. So again, if you had, the insurance company gave you an estimate that exceeded $100,000 in the example I gave you, and they paid you that $100,000, probably not going to be any questions. They're going to pay the $5,000 to the county. The county's going to accept the $5,000. I just wish that they would all get settled that easily. I wish that how much it costs to rebuild wasn't debatable. A lot of things I wish. What's the other kind of policy that doesn't have the excess? It reads basically the same way. We will pay reasonable expense for removal of debris of covered property if the peril is insured against. Down here, this expense is included in the limit of liability that applies to the damaged property. Again, the only difference is it doesn't have a clause saying that there's additional excess only after the base amounts get consumed. Okay, so let me explain what this is about. You're not going to be looking at all these numbers. I've said to you when we talked about the extent covered, and I've said it's not easy to calculate it correctly. And I could not find an example that would tell it better than this one right here. So this is State Farm. State Farm gives more information regarding how they make payments, I think, than probably any other company. They give a greater breakdown of it. So I was given workshops in Lake afterwards and telling folks, you know, you need to be very careful about paying your debris removal bill. Again, they get to pay it. So I had a lady who came in to one of my workshops, and she called a few days later, may I bring in my claim documents and my policy and have you look at things? And she brought this in. Now, normally on a scratch piece of paper, I literally do most of this that I have marked up in red, but I've done one here just to tell you that this literally is what I have to go through to figure out the debris removal exposure. So I'll take you to just a couple of numbers. The first thing I want to do is I want to see do they have enough insurance to rebuild their house? Approximately. You know, you have some idea. Square foot costs give you some indication. So her main limit is $280,000, and she has an extension. State Farm calls it increased dwelling, right here, $56,000. So if I add those two numbers together, I know that she's got $336,000 worth of coverage for her house. She tells me, and I look at the papers, it's a 1,900 square foot house. So easy, I divide it out, $177 a square foot. You could not, at that point in time, rebuild a house that she had for $177 a square foot. Clear as a bell. So unless the insurance company wrote an estimate showing a rebuilding cost that exceeded that $177 a square foot, she needed to fight to get the rest of her money. They did write a lower estimate. So if I took the amount of excess debris removal coverage that she had, and I took what they had already written into her policy, into their estimate, saying this much for debris removal expense, and then how much money that was still left that hadn't been designated for anything, all those came together, $66,000. I looked at how much her excess coverage was. Her excess coverage, $18,000. For her, it's a no-brainer. She hired me so that the difference between these two, she'd get put toward rebuilding her house, but she still didn't have enough money to rebuild her house. 2 years later, last month, I got the last check on this claim. It took me 2 years to fight to get that basically $40,000 difference, $45,000 difference for her. But we got it. So now we've gotten all of her policy coverages. We wrote estimates showing what it would cost to rebuild, greatly exceeding her policy limits. Should be a no-brainer that all she's going to have to pay is the $18,000. So I'm waiting for her to get a bill from the county. And again, I talked about the big difference in Lake County is the county did not have direct access to your money or even all the information about your claim. So they got the Department of Insurance. They went to the Department of Insurance and said, hey, would you inquire of all the insurance companies that had all these losses in Lake and get all this information for us? Give it to us. So the insurance company has to comply. So I got a whole stack of envelopes in my office from State Farm. One of them is hers. And you go through it, and they sent us a letter telling us that the DOI had made this inquiry, and they said this is all the information we sent to the DOI. So in that letter, they have a sheet saying to the DOI, this is how much money that we paid this lady for debris removal. $39,000. So I still have to fight to only pay the 18 instead of the 39. I've got to document it and so forth, and I've got to fight over it. State Farm is saying one thing, we're saying another. We've got this lady paid her policy limits. I'm telling her, go ahead and pay your $18,000. She can't pay the $18,000 yet because she doesn't have an invoice. In their infinite ability to manage all this paperwork so well, they can't find a record of ever doing the debris removal on her property. So she doesn't have an invoice at all. We've told them, y'all did the debris removal bill out here. Y'all did the debris removal. Where's the invoice? So 2 or 3 months later, we still don't have one. So I don't know when I'll get this resolved. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about the right of entry permits and the exposure on them. Let's talk a little bit about should you consider a private contractor for debris removal versus Cal Recycle contractor. Doing so gives you the option of leaving your foundation, your driveway, etc. As I said at the very beginning, they have now backed off and said in some cases they're going to leave some piers, where at first they were adamantly saying that they were going to take it all out. But I'll get in a second into how you determine whether or not to leave your foundation. But the bottom line is, if you hire a private contractor, you can say, I want this taken away, I want this taken away. Obviously, you have to get the hazardous materials and ash taken away, but you don't have to have everything else taken away. But FEMA's not necessarily going to do that. It is highly likely that it will cost less. But does that matter if the government program says you don't have to pay any amounts over your excess debris removal coverage? Well, in some parts of the right of entry permit, it sounds like they're saying you don't have to pay any more than the excess. But if you're having to fight with your insurance company to even get your limits, I've already covered that. That to me is a big issue. Are there any other potential advantages? As I look at that right of entry permit, I think liability is a big one. There are liability disclaimers in there, very much so. Some of the private contractors who were at the press conference were voicing opposition based on the fact that they have to carry liability insurance. They carry liability insurance that says if they come on and do the debris removal for you and they damage something that they shouldn't, they've got liability insurance. Now, the explanation that was given at the press conference was, well, yes, we require all these subcontractors to have it. And somebody says, well, if you require them to have it, how come the right of entry permit says they're not liable? I didn't hear a good answer to that. But again, let's talk about Lake County. Septic systems. A lot of them were virtually destroyed. People went out and they marked, if they knew where they were, where their drain fields were, where their septic systems were. A lot of them got destroyed. As far as I know, FEMA did not come back and pay a dime. And I know a lot of you over here are going to be on city sewer. Over there, people are spending $12,000 to $15,000 to replace some of those damaged systems out of their pockets. They didn't have any more insurance money to pay for it. People that asked, their driveways were undamaged. They said, please don't, leave my driveway. In some cases, as far as I know, FEMA did agree to not take out the driveways, but they got so damaged that they still end up having to come out later on, and now people have got to pay to have it taken out because they got so torn up. They're not getting any compensation for that. So those are some issues. Private contractors will, in many cases, come in with smaller equipment. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Were they used in the Valley and Clayton fire? Private contractors used? And the answer is yes. I spoke directly with the head of the Department of Environmental Health and asked him if he had any statistics. He told me that for the Valley fire, about 20% of the debris removal was done by private contractors. But you have to understand, if you've never been over there, it's a very sparsely populated county. Lakeport with 5,000 is the biggest community. Most of these little communities are 1,000, 1,500 people. And you can't get to Lake County unless you go over the mountains on a 2-lane road, pulling backhoes and things. So they didn't really have access to a lot of outside contractors. I believe that Santa Rosa is close enough to very populous areas and has roads and so forth that I think you'll probably see a good supply of private contractors available to work over here. Clayton fire, he told me that about 25% were done by private contractors. So what does that cost? Well, we had 5 of people who eventually became our clients hired private contractors. So I know this is a little bit fuzzy if you can read it or not, but over here is the debris removal cost with a private contractor, and over here is what the 5% coverage amounted to. $36,000 in cost, $99,000 in coverage. Big house. $28,000 in cost, $84,000 in coverage. Again, another big house, quite a bit of insurance. $44,000 in cost, $88,000 in coverage, still only half. $12,000 in cost, $19,000, almost $20,000 in coverage. $21,000 in cost, $53,000 in coverage. I do not know of any instances where people used private contractors and it exceeded their coverage amounts. Should I consider reusing my foundation? Well, how do you determine if it's safe? How do you determine if it will meet code? One of the main contractors, I say main contractors, he rebuilt a lot of homes right after the Valley fire. He's still rebuilding a lot. Has been over here on the ground almost from the beginning. I know him, I've talked to him several times. He called me again yesterday morning. They had been into examining houses. I think he already has a contract to rebuild one up on Mark West Springs Road. He already has a couple of contracts in Coffey Park. And he had examined the foundations. They looked very good to him. He's got plans, he's talked to engineers. So how do you determine it? You take a core sample, you send it off, have it laboratory tested. Has the heat caused it to lose its strength? You have an engineer look at the results. You have an engineer look at the foundation. You may need to do some repairs. You may need to reinforce it, but at least you look at those options and do so perhaps before making a decision about whether or not you want to go with the county's program. To have your core samples taken and tested would run about $1,500. Have an engineer involved is going to take a little bit more, but now you can make an educated decision without spending a whole lot of money on what you might want to do. Particularly in an area like the subdivision on the smaller city lots like Coffey Park is, you're not going to have a whole lot of flexibility in putting back very different houses in terms of size. So it should be a very good consideration there. And I'm going to talk about their foundations in a moment. Most of the foundations were taken out in Lake County, but we didn't have anywhere where we have small lot subdivision houses similar to that. Even up on Mark West Springs Road, you've got some houses up there with huge foundations. And in Fountain Grove, same thing. You're going to have so much concrete in those that it's going to be exorbitantly expensive to take it out. What kind of erosion issues are you going to create? Once you tear them out, you want to put back, you've got to go back and put in engineered fill, properly compacted, certified by a soils engineer. These are all things that are doable, but they all cost a lot of money. In Coffey Park, Mark from Lake County Contractors told me that they have estimated that it'll add about $50,000 to the cost if the foundation is taken out. That's for both soil replacement and compaction, and forming and pouring the new footings. And I'm going to show you what kind that they are here in just a moment. And again, if I use the Cal OES program, won't all the costs be covered? Well, if you have enough money, period, that's just a question that's hanging out there, and don't tell me when it would get answered. All right, I know this is a little fuzzy, but my purpose in giving you this slide is to show you these are original plans from Coffey Park. These are foundation plans. So all of these little column-looking things, these are these piers. This house, this set of foundation plans, there are 39 piers. So in these cases, they drill down into the soil, put their rebar forms down in there, fill it full of concrete. The rebar is still then sticking up higher, and then you form and pour a grade beam on top. Very expensive foundation. So again, this is just what I was told from folks who were here yesterday that went to Thursday's meeting, that FEMA has now said that they will remove the grade beam and leave the piers. But I talked to Mark Mitchell at Lake County, so let's talk about that in a minute. This would be on a larger job, but this is a photograph where that type of construction was actually taking place. So this gray area you see here, that's a drilled and poured pier. There's one there, go all the way around like that. So once you pour those, then you've still got rebar that's sticking up, and you form the rebar that goes into the grade beam. Not nearly as extensive as this amount of rebar, by the way. And you tie that rebar together. So if the grade beam were damaged, if the grade beam needed to be taken out, but you could leave the piers, you need to come in here with something like a like a bobcat that has a jackhammer attachment to it, and then you can break this out, in a, I want to almost say a surgical way, and leave these piers and leave this rebar that extended. Now, I never saw a small piece of equipment on any of the work that was being done by the Cal Recycle program. They came in with huge excavators. Streets, curbs, and gutters were just torn up. Driveways, everything was, because the equipment was so big, because they're trying to get it done in a hurry. I understand. I'm not being totally critical of that. But If that equipment is used and to try to take out just a grade beam, I will be very surprised if the piers will be reusable. If they don't get jerked up with it, if there's any rebar left to tie in, I would just be very surprised. So, one last thing. There's one section that I want to read. I worded very carefully. Please be aware, I am potentially making myself a target by putting on this informational workshop. Your combined governmental agencies are making a concerted effort to do this cleanup in a fashion that they think is best. Because I have such strong opinions about the possible ramifications to people signing this right of entry permit in its present form, I attempted both in my public question at last Monday's press conference and afterwards to attempt to have it reviewed and changed so that the language matches what you are being told verbally. When I was rebuffed, I felt I had no choice but to put on these presentations. I am not and will not be advising you whether or not you should sign the right of entry permit. That will be your decision. I just want to make sure you understand what it says as to how it relates to payments from your insurance coverage and the potential effects. However, I fully expect there to be backlash, criticism, and misrepresentation of what I'm saying here. Please take every opportunity to share with others if you think this is honest and valuable information. So, lastly, the California Insurance Adjuster Licensing Law prohibits me from soliciting, and I wouldn't be doing that today even if I could. However, if you wish to speak to us directly concerning your claim, you can contact us, and then we are allowed under California law to respond to you. If you wish to do that, see Karen as you leave. She will give you her cell phone number and she will set an appointment. My wonderful wife of 46 years. The web address. This entire presentation will be up over the weekend, and as we get additional information, we're going to also set up segments of information. We're going to do as much as we possibly can just to help people understand all of this.